All right, we're here. We're gonna hang for a minute while some more folks file in. I see Anders here and Mikhail is here. Welcome. I'm sure we'll get some more folks in here. And if not, you know what? Two's cool too. Doesn't bother me one bit. Oh, we already have someone join. Hi, Kevin. Welcome. Welcome. So I'll try to keep an eye on the chat. So if you have questions already about email deliverability that you want me to touch on, just drop it in the chat and we can get to them. So we have a few more folks coming in. Maybe we'll give it like 2 or 3 minutes and then we'll jump straight in and totally open for questions throughout. We'll have plenty of time towards the end for Q&A. And don't mind questions that are very specific to your circumstances. Feel free to write them out right there in the chat. Good. More people coming in. Nice. Good group. Got Paul and Mihail and Matt and Kevin and Anders and Alex. Apologies if your name's not Mihail and you just forgot the C and it's actually Michael, but I'm going to assume you wrote your name correctly. Hi, Steve from Minneapolis. Nice. Minnesota. I think I remember where Minneapolis is. Cool. We'll give it maybe just one more minute and then we'll jump into it. This webinar is not going to take too much time to get through the core material, and there's plenty of time for questions. And feel free to drop any questions. Nice to hear. Another beautiful day up north. Brooklyn's a bit gray today. It's a bit cool and gray. It's better than yesterday. It was scorching hot. So who knows? I'm in New York City, by the way, not any of the other Brooklyns out there, of which there are more than one would imagine. Great. All right, let's wait for one more person or just one more minute and then we'll jump straight into the good stuff. Here's some questions for you all if you want to let me know. Steve already took the initiative here and said where Steve was. I assume you guys are doing cold email or you're doing opt-in email or both. Are you using Google for mailing? Are you using other services for emailing? If you're an opt-in mail person or using MailChimp, something like that. And are you having a specific deliverability problem or issue right now? Or is this some sort of defensive strategy where you're coming in to learn about it, but you don't have a problem, which is fine too. Feel free to answer these questions or any questions like this. Got it. Matt, nice to hear you have your own private infrastructure, no specific issues. Cold email and opt-in email using Apollo. Great. Steve, are you using Google to send those emails out? Okay. Cool. Using Outlook. Okay, cool. So you're now officially in the email deliverability rabbit hole. The email deliverability rabbit hole goes really, really deep. And one of the things that our team really focuses on when companies come to us is ending their dig into the rabbit hole. For those of you who don't know what that means, because you're from overseas or something, just means you dig and you dig and you dig and you dig. And as far as you go down that hole, there's always more hole to dig into. Our team specializes in sending high volume cold emails, and we've been doing it professionally since 2016. We've sent tens of millions of emails. We continue to send tens of millions of emails, and dozens and dozens and dozens of large companies, small companies that rely heavily on cold email rely on us to help make sure that their email sends are healthy and they last as long as they need to in terms of volume. They can hit the volume they need and all those other things. So we really only speak from experience. What I found when I went out to the email deliverability community online was that a lot of people who are talking about email deliverability really only have 5 clients and they aren't sending that many emails. And I'm sure that they have something useful to share, in terms of their own experience. Typically, their experience doesn't match up with ours. And partially that's because we're seeing so many different kinds of emailing across so many different levels of volumes, multiples upon multiples that they're seeing. So we have a very clear perspective that's much broader. And we launched webinars like this one and other opportunities to share advice and attract clients by sharing more and more information. So I'm the CEO and founder. We have a technical team. I don't know if any members of our technical team are on this call, but we have a technical team that handles the technical aspects of IP address management and domain management. And then we have account management folks, and that's our team. Cool. Your domains are not set up correctly to not damage your main domain reputation. So I'm working to change that. Great. That makes sense, Steve. That's cool. Charlotte, North Carolina, cold email using Apollo, sending via Google. Okay, cool, Kevin. What kind of volume are you trying to send, Kevin? All right. One thing to touch on, the big question is cold email dying or is it thriving? The answer to this is not as easy as it used to be. Cold email worked very well when it was slightly more rare. Now you have to work harder to make cold email really work. It's also kind of a trick question because it all depends on the cost per lead for your individual organization and the cost you're investing in cold email as a channel. If you think about hardcore spammers who are selling exotic things or running scams, they might get one click out of a million email sends and be doing really, really well because they're sending 100 million emails a day or something. That's a really weird equation. Most clients you see who use cold email successfully might have a 0.1% interested reply rate. So 1 out of 1,000 emails or 1 out of 100 emails, somewhere 0.1 to 1% or even 2, 3, 4, 5%. And even if they're that successful, the ROI might not make sense. So cold email is a channel. It still functions fine. For some people, they're finding it's working very well. For some people, they're finding that it's not working very well. But at the end of the day, what really matters about cold email is what you're actually cold emailing and what the actual expectation is. That is to say that if you're expecting to cold email and get people to sign up for a demo, we still see that work for a lot of clients, but that might not work for your purposes. So cold email, in a sense, might be dying for that particular purpose, but for the purpose of emailing folks to see if they want to come to an in-person event, you might get a 5 or 6% interested reply rate, and then cold email magically works. So as a medium, it's a choose your own adventure. It's certainly not dying, as evidenced by the dozens and dozens and dozens of clients that we have that use the infrastructure that we work with, that we manage for them. But it certainly means that for some folks, cold email doesn't work that well. Cool. Kevin, that makes sense. Thanks for mentioning your volume. You say crazy high volume. It's always funny when people say things like, oh, we're not doing a crazy high volume. Most of our clients send on the low side 400 emails per day, all the way up to 4,000 emails per day plus. And I don't consider 4,000 emails a day crazy high volume, depending on the size of your target market. I think that 400 emails a day is pretty low volume, but some people think that 40 emails a day is low volume. So there's definitely a gradient there. Today, we're going to mainly talk about the 4 elements of email that are under your control, which are domains, IPs, DNS, and your own email usage. And we're going to focus on the known truth of these, the fiction surrounding them, and then the unknowns of each of them. And I like this format because it's a little bit more fun because we can throw a little bit of shade on the fictions and the unknown parts. So let's jump into it. So IP addresses. IP addresses are largely misunderstood. The truth is that IP addresses matter a lot. And they matter a lot because the validity of your IP address and the health of your IP address has a lot to do with how recipient email servers are judging you when you come in the door. It's sort of like if you think about international trade, if something gets sent from a country that almost never has any contraband sent from it, like Japan, the US Customs Authority isn't opening that many of these boxes, presumably. They're not scanning so deeply. They're not super worried about it because the chances that a shipment of fentanyl is coming through the port from Japan seems very, very low. Well, that might not be the case for another country. Another country, they might say, look, a larger percentage of these things are coming from that kind of country, so we're going to check very deeply. IP addresses somewhat work similarly, although on a much larger scale, because there's millions and millions of IP addresses out there. The truth is, IP address matters a lot. The fiction is the way that people talk about IP addresses, the way people use them, oftentimes introduces a lot of fictions. The number one fiction I'm seeing right now, people talk about is dedicated IPs being better than shared IPs. And folks who talk a lot about how dedicated IPs are better than shared IPs don't really understand that the word shared has multiple definitions when you're talking about IPs. So let me explain. An IP address, if an IP address is used to send all of your emails, then that becomes a single point of failure. Meaning, if the wider internet decides that your IP address is a bad IP address, you will have a lot of trouble getting those emails delivered. On the far other side, you have shared IP pools. Most people believe that Google has some of the best email deliverability on the planet. Doesn't mean that they have the best sendability on the planet because Google does a lot to prevent you from sending a lot of emails. So it doesn't mean that it's the best infrastructure to send from or even desirable to send from it at all. However, Google has very healthy IP addresses and they do sending very well. If you're sending from Google, you are sending from shared IPs. You're sharing IP addresses across all the different users of Google that Google has assigned to the same set of IP addresses. That's one way to think about shared IP addresses. There are multiple users using the same IP address or addresses. The other way to think about shared IP addresses is you're sharing IP addresses across your email sending. That is to say, you can have your own set or array of dedicated IPs that you use to do your own sending. So instead of many IP addresses, many senders, you can have many IP addresses and one sender. And by and large, that form of sending, multiple IP addresses for a small number of senders or one sender, is preferable than a single dedicated IP address. That is to say that going from a shared IP pool to a dedicated IP might absolutely make your sending terrible, especially if the IP address isn't properly set up, warmed up, configured, monitored, kept very, very healthy. However, doing multiple IP addresses that you keep healthy and happy and in good condition can dramatically stabilize your email sending, if that makes some sense at all. Any questions here, you can drop them in the chat. It's being a little bit nitpicky with definitions here, but I really want you to understand the differences between these things. So the unknowns are that IP addresses are technically identical. They look, I mean, all the IP addresses of the same type are technically identical, but they just don't act the same. And how the IP addresses are going to act and how the internet perceives them can change wildly, which means that any kinds of IP addresses that you're going to use, you need to monitor them very carefully. And monitoring and managing IP addresses is one of the main functions that our team does for our clients. And we find that most people who use IP addresses, whether dedicated or a set of IP addresses, aren't actually doing the kind of monitoring and maintenance that they need to be doing on an active basis in order to keep their sending healthy. And keep in mind, this is totally separate from domains, which we're not talking about yet at all. Let's jump to the next unknown, or the next truth fiction unknown, which is email warming. Email warming companies make a lot of claims about what email warming does. The truth is that it does do something. Email warming successfully changes the ratio of sends. This is the number one thing that email warming does. If you send one email and 99 warming emails, only 1% of your emails has a chance of not being opened, and 99% of them will be opened because the email warming system will open them. So email warming does do something. It changes the ratio of sends, and changing the ratio of sends oftentimes has a positive impact on deliverability, because something having a large number of spam reports negatively impacts deliverability. So we know the reverse happens. If there is a very high ratio of negative things to positive things, the domain seems to accrue damage, and the damage means poor deliverability. And email warming changes the ratio, which means that more of those emails are not going to spam and more of those emails are being opened, which should positively affect the deliverability. The fiction here is that it's enough to do some sort of repair on a damaged domain, or polish the turd, so to speak. If your cold emailing is atrociously bad, or your domain is in terrible condition, is warming actually doing a lot of positive, having a large positive effect on the domains? Relatively unclear. It's been proven that not sending for a period of time will improve domain health. So if you actually put the domain on ice, it can improve it. Is it very difficult to prove that you can't really test the same domain or two different domains, one warming, one not, and seeing which one's repairs faster? Because there's almost no clear data that shows the equivalency of domain damage across two domains and then the extent that they repair themselves. So it's sort of a unknown, and that leads into the unknowns, which is more warming better? Does it do anything in the long term? How long will it continue to work? All these things are relatively unknown with warming. We know it does something because it changes the ratios, but most of the claims about it are hard to prove. And the unknowns are, we don't really know if doing more is better or anything like that. It's pretty odd situation, I would say. Let's jump to the next one, which is the daily volume from single domain or single email address. The truth here is that there actually is no upper limit. Why is this even something that's questioned? Well, when I started doing cold email professionally, I think I started this company in 2016, but I'd already been cold emailing for a few years prior to that. You could set up a Google email address, probably even on a new domain, although that wasn't necessary, and send 400 emails a day with no problem. And a lot of people were sending a lot more, 800, 1200, no problem. Over time, Google, for example, has clamped down, and by 2020, that was under 100 emails a day. And it was around that time that my team decided, hey, we're not going to send any more emails from Google. Google doesn't really want us here. We're going to find other ways to do this. Since 2020, it seems to have shrunk lower and lower and lower now. Some people are reporting they can send 10 emails a day or 5 emails a day. Some people set up new accounts or add a new user, and it gets suspended even before they send a single email, which sounds pretty wild, but it's happening more and more. But the truth is that sendability from Google has been going down, but actually email itself, there is no upper limit on the number of emails that you can send from a single domain or single email address. And that's easily evidenced by the largest companies in the world that send millions or hundreds of millions or emails a day, someone like Facebook or a giant airline that's sending out all these marketing emails. They typically send these things from like 1 or 2 emails, literally 1 or 2 domains or 1 or 2 email addresses, all of them. So there's no inherent reason why a single email address can't send millions and millions and millions of emails a day. There are some practical reasons why you want to do that, especially for cold email, but there is no actual factual basis for an email address or an email domain only being able to send a certain number of emails. The fiction here is that you can only send a certain number. So when you see people online say, oh, you can really only send 50 or you should only send 50, that is not factually accurate. It makes no sense. My team oftentimes sends 4,000 plus emails a day from a single domain without any issue for years, without any problems at all. So there's no reason why. So it's largely fictional. I think what people are doing is they're mixing up sendability and deliverability, and they're trying to use Google or something like Google to send a lot of emails, or Microsoft to send a lot of emails. And In that scenario, you are limited in the number of emails you can send, either by Google suspending you or Microsoft allowing you to send, but sending you from poor IP pools and your email's not properly being delivered. The unknown here is how many emails can be sent from your domains. That largely has to do a lot with the age of your domains. Age matters a lot. And one of the reasons why we're seeing so many people attempting to do a multi domain strategy with very low email volume per domain is that they're using all new domains. And new domains tend to have a very short shelf life and have a low capacity for healthy sending. For our clients, we only use age domains, and age domains sometimes years old, if not years old, minimum 3, 6, 9 months old. And those fundamentally are more stable and can sustain higher sending limits with damage being delayed or non-existent. So the unknowns is how many emails can be sent from your specific domains in your specific scenarios, and whether or not you need to introduce subdomains and other things like that. Cool. Let's jump to number 4, which is primary inbox. It seems to be one of these things that kind of folks on the internet like to say, this is a surefire way to get in the primary inbox. That's a really funny thing. That's almost like saying this is a surefire way for the Netflix show that you produce to get in their primary queue. And you're like, well, isn't it based on every user? Yeah, it's based on every user. Nobody really knows the default settings. It's an unknown. What are the default settings of the email sorting mechanism that Google has? They've never published information on the primary settings. If you go to set up sorting in your email inbox, it doesn't tell you specifically how it's going to be sorting things. Is there a surefire way for the internet to know if the email that I just got from the person I met at the conference is cold? Maybe, but maybe I'm the type of person that only wants emails from my team members in the primary and everything else goes to the secondary. I don't know. Maybe I'm the type of person that checks my receipts like a hawk, and I want all my receipts to go to my primary inbox and all the personal emails from other people I want to go to secondary. Google will generally, and Microsoft will, or whatever inbox provider will generally comply with whatever it is. So the truth is every user is different. And the fiction is there's a surefire way to get into the primary inbox. And the unknown is, does it even matter? Getting into the inbox at all is a feat. It's an accomplishment. It's a good thing. And you're in the running to be read and responded to. So I'm not sure it matters at all. All right, number 5. Is email personalization a necessity? The truth is that targeting matters, and sometimes evidence of targeting matters. Now, evidence of targeting means you're emailing someone. Let's say you're emailing nurse practitioners who work in large health systems. Okay, great. If your email says, I'm emailing health practitioners who work in large health systems, that is a customization. It is a personalization. That can help a lot because this person receives it and goes, well, this email is intended for me. Therefore, when I read it, I'm expecting it to be relevant to me. If you miss that, if you don't surface that information, sometimes people think, is this really for me? Is this really for a doctor? Is this really for nurse practitioners? I'm not quite sure. And that could make it less likely for them to reply to the email. So targeting matters a lot, and evidence of targeting can matter a lot in your emailing. The fiction here is that more personalization has a better reply rate, or always has a better reply rate. That is very dubious. And the reason why it's dubious is the parameters that people typically personalize emails are telling the person you're emailing to about them. So I'm Benny. There's traits about me and my business. It doesn't matter to me if you email me and say, hey, Benny, I see you're in Brooklyn. Brooklyn's a nice place. Well, I already know I'm in Brooklyn. That's fine. Oh, I see that you're a serial entrepreneur and you've had multiple companies. Yes, that is a fact, but that's something that I already knew as well. So the fiction is that including more information that looks like personalization really matters. It largely doesn't matter, especially if it's biographical information that is freely available on the internet and anyone could access and jam into an email. Where it can sometimes work better is if the biographical information about me gets woven into the actual pitch. But typically those are pretty rare. The kinds of personalization that I'm seeing a lot of are, I read your article on LinkedIn about blah. I totally agree that blah and blah and blah. And I'm like, okay. And then, so what are you guys using for a personalized video or something like that? And I'm like, huh? Like, what are you talking about? Like those two things don't connect at all in a meaningful way. And because they don't connect, I guess it's cool that you read my article or you had ChatGPT read my article, but it doesn't really move the needle. So I would say that email personalization isn't a necessity at all. If your value prop makes sense and your targeting makes sense, you oftentimes don't need to go overboard with personalization. And the unknown here is we don't know, and you don't know necessarily what will work best for your target audience until you do quite a lot of testing. And it's difficult to test in cold email, especially if you're trying to test more or less personalization. What we find works best is start with absolutely no personalization, just reasonable targeting and a clear value proposition. And then if you feel like that's not working, you can add in a little bit of more personalization. But I don't think that largely you're going to see a huge jump in interested reply rates if you're doing personalization that's just adding biographical information about the person you're emailing. All right, number 6. I don't know how many of these we have. Not too many of them though, so don't freak out if you're a little bit getting a little tired of hearing me talk already. Email verification and filtration. So this one we can go pretty quickly through. Verification does help email deliverability, meaning checking to see if emails are going to bounce and filtering out the ones that cause bounces. That is truthful. Your email deliverability will improve if you have fewer bounced emails. The fiction is that just because it bounced for someone else, it will bounce for you. So this is to say that your email system and your email environment itself might be causing bounces to happen. Email systems might look at your email specifically and say, we are not going to deliver that, and send a note back that says we are not going to deliver that. While if I sent the email or someone else sent the email, it might go through without bouncing. So just because it bounced for someone else doesn't mean it'll bounce for you. And just because it bounced for you doesn't mean it'll bounce for someone else. So the fiction is that a bounce is a bounce, and wherever the bounce happens, it's definitely going to be a bounce. Now, if the email is invalid and it bounces, then likely it doesn't matter who emails it because it's just going to bounce anyway. The unknowns about this section is really an interesting one, which is you don't know the threshold of bounces that will start to negatively impact your deliverability health. Google, for example, recently came out with information that said roughly 0.3% of emails, if 0.3% of your emails are marked as spam, it will negatively impact your deliverability. That's great. They didn't tell you if you're sending emails and X number bounce, then that will negatively affect your deliverability. So that is largely an unknown. All right. The number 7, call to action efficacy. What we found to be truthful is the easier or lower bar call to action tends to produce interested replies more. If they can reply with sure or yeah, that tends to work better for cold email than higher bar or more challenging. How's Tuesday at 2 p.m.? Tuesday at 2 p.m. I don't know. I got to check my calendar. Let me look at my calendar. Oh, Tuesday's all jammed up. Do I really want to see this? Do I really want to have a conversation with this person? I'm not sure. I'd rather just not respond. It's fine. So that's a higher bar. CTA would be asking a specific thing. The fiction is that there's a magical CTA that works for everyone. Folks love to post about stuff on the internet, like the one CTA that always lands the meeting. And that's largely fictional. And the unknown is that, well, part of the project of running cold email is you testing, and finding what's going to work. So the unknown is what's going to work for you. What is the correct CTA for your target audience? And really only you can know that. All right, number 8, images and tracking pixels in emails. Recently, Google has ramped up their default not loading of tracking pixels. So the way that images, the way that open rate tracking works typically in email is it sends a very, very tiny picture, little pixel, And when that pixel gets opened, when the email gets opened, it sends information to the internet calling the picture. And that little picture actually is an indication to the sender that the email was opened. If Google doesn't let the recipient load the email, load the images in the email, then that little pixel doesn't get sent and you don't know if someone opened. Recently, Google has been doubling down on not loading images for recipients. And you have to click a button if you want to load them. And that has been negatively impacting open rates, although it hasn't necessarily been impacting deliverability unless the people mark it as spam at the same time that they're not allowing the pixel to be loaded. So the truth is that images and tracking pixel in emails do negatively affect your open rates, and they can have a negative effect on deliverability if people are more likely to mark them as spam. The fiction is that having no images will magically make your emails go to the main inbox, or go to inbox at all. There's lots of layers to spam filtration, and simply not having an image or not having tracking doesn't automatically mean that your emails won't be filtered out. Maybe it'll increase your chances of being delivered, but not necessarily magic in that way. Unknowns, as with all things with email deliverability, there's a lot of unknowns. If an image is attached, is if it's a real image versus a tracking pixel image, does that change deliverability? It's hard to tell, kind of unknown, at least from our perspective. If the image itself is a signature-based image, is a signature-based image treated differently because it's at the bottom of the email and it's relatively small versus a larger image? Maybe, maybe not. Probably larger images impact worse. A tracking pixel is a very, very small image. What if you make your signature image the tracking pixel rather than the tracking pixel being a separate pixel? Well, that meant these are all unknowns. You'd have to do a lot of testing across a large number of emails to even get anywhere near knowing. And those are all the prepared Q&A, prepared notes. I'm not sure if there'll be too many. You guys have any questions? Anything? Usually I throw like some slide in here that's like silly to wake everyone up. But the last time I did it, it was about thrash metal. And it seemed that no one found any humor in me asking questions about the thrash metal bands I was into in high school. But does anyone here have any questions? It's cool if there are no questions. Okay. Matt asked about subdomains. Yes, happy to answer that. Okay, cool. I'll start by saying that Steve, Chris Lee from my team is going to send you a note, Steve. And I think this week might be tough, but next week, I'm happy to assign one of my technicians to help you check to make sure your domains are set up correctly. Happy to do that free of charge. So Chris Lee will be in touch with you, Steve Grady, about fixing that. As for Kevin, looking to potentially increase your volume, there's basically only two ways to increase your volume with email. If you're using Google, one is to use more Google accounts, which has problems and is limited. The other way is to do completely separate setup with separate IP addresses that don't use Google's infrastructure at all. And in that case, you can easily ramp up in volume. So it probably makes sense for you to talk to Chris Lee once just about how we approach the high volume situation and see if what we do makes sense for you, or at least give you some advice on that. So Chris Lee will probably reach out to you, Kevin, to chat through that. Okay. Peter, hi. Thanks. Question. So volume benefit from moving away from Google. Well, if you move away from Google, you're exposing IP address health into your scenario, which means that now there's more things to manage and monitor. This is what we specialize in, is moving people away from Google into a more wild but potentially better environment. There really is no limit to the number of emails that you can send if you're not sending from Google. I would say the same for Microsoft. Microsoft treats emails differently from Google, but by and large, those two systems really don't want you sending emails at a high volume, and they do everything they can to make it hard for you to do that. So the real benefit is you can actually send a lot of emails if that's what you want to do, if you move away from Google. And like I said, there are downsides to moving away from Google in that if your goal actually is to send a very low volume of emails, even though it violates Google's policies, Google has very good email deliverability. I hope that answered your question, Peter. And the specific topic of moving away from Google, I've written a lot about on LinkedIn and other places. Chrisley, why don't you reach out to Peter and see if you can chat through the nuts and bolts of moving away from Google and what it looks like and what my team does versus what Peter could potentially experiment with doing on their own. Let's see, Tom. Does sending via subdomain affect my domain? Okay, and Matt is also interested in subdomains. This is a very interesting question. Subdomains tend to have their own reputation for sending. It does not mean that the subdomain, if the subdomain accrues a very, very, very bad reputation, it might negatively affect the main domain, but it's not default going to affect the main domain. And this largely has to do with a couple of factors, but the subdomain takes on the age of the main domain. And if the main domain is aged properly, the subdomain gets the sort of age without getting all of the reputational aspects of the main domain. If you think about the history of email and the internet just a little bit, and just go down this sort of thought experiment with me, largely the people who invented email were part of university and government systems. And when they were assigning IP domains and IP addresses to all these different institutions, they likely imagined that a university, like let's say the University of Michigan, would have universityofmichigan.edu, and everything would be universityofmichigan.edu. But then they quickly realized that actually, if you delineate based on subdomain, you could have science.universityofmichigan.edu. You could have philosophy. All these different departments could have their own subdomain, and those subdomains could become different websites and used in different ways. So I think that largely they didn't want to punish the whole organization for mishaps that happen in one part. And so the internet is more malleable in the sense that there are IT directors and cybersecurity folks that might realize that a subdomain for a large company was taken over, and they might block all of the emails from that subdomain, but not the main domain because the main domain wasn't compromised, for example. So there's lots of examples of sort of slicing it more thinly, and subdomains are one way to slice it more thinly. We do find that subdomains can be warmed and sustain sending very healthily and not inflict damage on the main domain over long periods of time. Again, if you do something really crazy and silly with a subdomain, then it likely will affect the main domain. If you look at the way that most very large email senders in the world do it, including every single major airline and almost every single major consumer brand, it's all done with subdomains. And it's the same way with the way Google does their own emailing, the way Facebook does their emailing, the way Delta Airlines does their emailing. Very, very, very few things are actually sent from a non-subdomain delineated email address. And for us and our clients, for senders and our clients, we also reflect that in the way we do sending. We send from subdomains. Whether the subdomain is on an alternate domain, that's a separate question. If the alternate domain is aged enough, then a subdomain on the alternate domain will also provide enough protection from the main domain or the domain that's being used. All right, let's see. Has the change to flagging tracking pixels been reported, verified by Google or third parties? When was the change on this made? Seeing a lot of it on LinkedIn, mostly people trying to sell me alternatives. That's a really good question, Davidson. So Google tends to roll changes out gradually or in pockets in different ways, in different groups with different things. It's not actually clear. I don't think they've made any announcement, and I don't think it's the type of thing they announce. So we're all, back in the day during like the Cold War, no one really knew what the Kremlin the people who work in the government in Russia were thinking. So there are all these people that had a job of Kremlinologist, where they were experts in like trying to figure out what the Kremlin was thinking from the outside. That we're all Googleologists. We're basically all just saying, what is Google doing? What is Google thinking? And Google makes very few announcements based on anything. But one of the patterns of behavior that Google does is they change things from being default to not being default. So likely some users in some ways had an admin panel that said, do you want to load an admin option that said, do you want to allow your users to load images automatically? And people could say, yes, I'm okay with images being loaded automatically. Probably what they did was they switched all that to default no. And now an admin of a large organization has to go in and switch it to default yes. What does that mean? It means that basically Google is saying, we're looking more suspiciously at emails with open tracking and pixels and hidden things in them now more than before. Therefore, we will make it default for everyone that we're not going to be loading images directly. So Google hasn't made an announcement. Likely this has been being tested for months and months and months, and now it's sort of gone mainstream, so to speak, or it's been launched for a large number of Google Workspace accounts. And we are seeing a change in just open rates are being reporting smaller. Now, interestingly, Davison, and this is where it gets a little bit interesting. Not that many months ago, I'm not exactly sure when, more than a year ago, but not that long ago, everyone was reporting the exact opposite problem. The rumor on the street and the LinkedIn mill was basically saying Google is pre-opening every email and looking at it, and it's getting registered as an open, and Apple Mail's pre-opening emails. Therefore, open rates are all horribly inflated and they make no sense. And now it's the opposite. So largely, we don't really know how it's going to play out. All we know is open rates were kind of faulty before, and now we're pretty sure that they're pretty faulty. And you should be judging your campaign metrics on replies, interested replies, and anything else that you're using in tracking, including click tracking, if that's something that you found, something that you want to do or have a reason to do. Hope that makes sense. Kevin, you said more specific messages. What do you mean? What do you mean by that? Okay, Tom asked, does the waiting period for a domain start on the date of purchase? Yes, the waiting period for a domain starts on the date of purchase. There's some interesting things about domains that I'm certainly not an expert on this, and we have other technicians on our team that are, like, know these things in much more detail. Typically, when the domain is registered to a domain registrar, that is when the time starts. And that means that oftentimes if you buy a domain from a auction site, the domain has already been transferred to that registrar. So sometimes you can buy domains that are actually properly aged. They're actually older than you bought them because they're not actually moving. I don't want to give a definitive answer on that. That's something that my technical dudes can do, but that is a new rabbit hole if you want to go down that. Can you buy an aged domain that hasn't been moved or re-registered? Once it's been registered, that is typically the start of the clock. Let's see. Is there a benefit to having Microsoft send to Microsoft, Google send to Google from a spam filtering perspective? This is interesting. I think that I don't see any real evidence for this. In some ways, Google can see everything that you're sending, all the way from how it's being sent, how many it's being sent, and who it's being delivered to. And that largely means that Google is sure that you're sending a lot of emails, and you're sure that a lot of your emails, or almost all your emails, are cold emails. So that, by that logic, you'd think that that would hurt your deliverability because Google has full visibility into your lunacy. Well, the opposite would potentially improve your deliverability. For example, Microsoft, Google, when Google is delivering email, let's say when it's receiving email, it's almost like a public utility. In other words, Google's job when it gets an email to one of its users is to find the email into the inbox or filter it out. That's their job. So they're largely asking themselves the question, is this a valid email to be delivered, or is this harmful and should be filtered out? On the sending side, Google works more on a strict compliance framework where they're saying, is this email a legitimate send or not, or should we stop it from being sent? Does this email violate our policies? Yes or no? Should we allow it to be sent? So if Google has visibility across all of that, that means they're both the judge, the jury, and the executioner. And I feel like that's kind of a strange position to be in. Same thing with Microsoft. It almost seems to me like you'd have better deliverability sending across networks because Google would facilitate the send and Microsoft would say, hey, this looks like a pretty legitimate email, we should deliver it, without any knowledge of all the other email activity that's being done from it. Some people anecdotally have said that no, same network increases deliverability a lot. I have not seen evidence of that. And one thing that I should also say is that because my team hasn't done any cold emailing from Google or Microsoft since 2020, which is almost 5 years, it's been just about 4 years. We don't have a lot of data to say, yes, this definitely is better than another because we're not actively testing sending emails from Google or sending from Microsoft. Hope that answers. I'm trying to make my answers very thorough and not so glib, like quick and snappy, because it is a relatively nuanced question. So I feel like it's good. All right, let's see. 15 minutes to go. Please check both chat. Oh, that was a note for me. I'm reading. Sorry. All right. Let's make this the last question, and then I'll briefly. Actually, I'm going to answer one more question, which is a question from PH. It doesn't say the name, but that's okay. And before I answer, oh, it's from Peter again. Okay, I'm going to answer one more question. Before that, I'm going to mention our sponsors. And this is our contact information. Feel free to send me an email, benny@senders.co, or Chris Lee. I think Chris Lee is going to reach out to a few folks on here that mentioned. If anyone else wants to have a chat with Chris Lee and go over some details and ask specific questions, or even potentially have a call with one of our technical folks, you can just drop a note in the webinar chat. Even if you don't have any interest in buying from us or we're out of your price range, you can see our pricing and stuff on the website. That's fine too. We're happy to chat with anyone who's here. We appreciate you giving your attention to us, and we'd like to give some of our attention back to you as well. We have some sponsors for the show. We actually have a pretty comprehensive partnership network for the clients that work with us. We offer them discounts across all different types of things. 5 of those here are Nacho, Craze and Friends. They do a free marketing audit and a consultation on marketing, SEO, all that kind of stuff. Startup Stack, which is a bunch of startup discounts, which is cool. You guys should check that out if you're looking for discounts on things, including on Apollo.io. Secure Labs does compliance stuff. Forecaster does CFO related services. All good people and all partners of ours. All right, let's answer the final question. And no, Peter, there are no dumb questions. You've seen people using Google email addresses to send upwards of 10,000 emails per day through platforms like MailChimp or Constant Contact. Are those platforms doing something magical? Okay, let's reframe the question. The real question here is, what is different between Apollo.io and MailChimp? I wouldn't say that's the real question, but let's start there. What is the difference between Apollo.io and MailChimp? If you were thinking about it in terms of a stack, MailChimp's stack has more pieces to it than Apollo's stack does. What do I mean by that? MailChimp also includes the ability to send emails, while the Apollo stack does not include the ability to send emails. That's why if you're setting up your Apollo.io account or your Outreach.io account or your Lemlist account or whatever, it says connect an email address to send. If you're setting up a MailChimp account, it does not say connect a mail inbox to send. There's no inbox connection in MailChimp setup. The reason is MailChimp is actually facilitating the send. They're providing the IP addresses. They are the email service provider for you. So are people using Google Mail to send through MailChimp? The answer is no. They might be using an email address that is also registered with Google to send via MailChimp. So the domain is the same, but the actual send is not going through Google. Does that generally make sense? It's not that they're doing something magical, it's that it's actually more layers in the stack. And fundamentally, the one thing I'll add to this is the business of sending opt-in, subscription, email, or transactional email, those are opt-in. They're subscribers. They tend to have a really healthy email environment. And you can have a large company host all those email sends without issue. The problem we have in our cold email community is that most email service providers don't want to facilitate cold email at all because it's actually damaging and it looks a lot like spam and it's sort of seen as bad. So if you go on MailChimp and you try to send cold emails, you might get a few rounds of emails out and they're going to figure it out pretty quickly because all they're doing all day is making sure that folks are not sending unsolicited emails from their networks and their platforms. While someone like Apollo or folks like that are saying, hey, bring your own email infrastructure because we're not going to be responsible for your email delivery. Hope that makes sense. We posted a link here with all of the sponsors in the chat. And hey, thanks everyone for joining. It was really fun. Feel free to get in touch. If you have deeper questions, more specific questions, folks on my team are happy to help. And thanks, Matt. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I'm gonna end this now. Don't be a stranger. Get in touch. And we're happy to help if you need it. Bye, everyone. Thanks.